Perfect. Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're very happy today to be joined by two of our resident coordinators in the Caribbean region. So the first one is Dennis Zulu, who is the resident coordinator in Jamaica, as well as the Bahamas. And I understand he is joining us from the Bahamas. And we also have Simon Springett, the resident coordinator in Barbados and Eastern Caribbean, which includes Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as Grenada. And I understand he is joining us from Grenada. They will brief you, as you can expect, on Hurricane Beryl and the aftermath of the hurricane. And so without further ado, let me give the floor first to Mr. Zulu.
Thank you so much, and a good morning to everyone. Let me first start by saying that our hearts and prayers are with those in Jamaica who've lost their lives and property, as well as in the Eastern Caribbean. As you know, Beryl escalated in intensity in very little time, and this is just the start of what will be a very active hurricane season. A tropical wave is actually right behind Beryl, and the flash flood watch remains in effect in the different parishes of Jamaica. We report that at least one death has occurred associated with the hurricane conditions, with the second one yet to be confirmed. And at the moment, 70% of the customer base is without water supply. It's also known that 40% of customers are without electricity, but repair teams are working hard to get this back into place. So at the moment, we also have a problem with data connectivity. Obviously, the service providers were affected. Now, in terms of government and UN response, even at this very critical time, I really want to thank and commend the government of Prime Minister Andrew Holness and the government of Jamaica for leading a very proactive approach in response to the effects of Hurricane Beryl. The UN has already communicated our readiness to support the government of Jamaica, and I'm happy to note that the government is very receptive to UN support, and we will, with government's guidance, be able to now stage an appropriate and tailored response. We've already secured access to 2.5 million, which is a special allocation from the Emergency Response Fund through SURF, which with the potential for expanded support depending on government's assessments and priorities. The government response has been activated, and the UN stands ready to assist, drawing from experiences, obviously, with other Eastern Caribbean islands and Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas some years ago. The UN has activated its emergency task team, co-chaired by UNICEF and WFP in Jamaica. And this team has been advising the UN country team and the felt needs of the government in areas such as protection, WASH, which is water, sanitation and hygiene, education, shelters, logistics, and health and nutrition. And of course, early recovery, food security, and telecommunications. We're also in direct contact with the key government ministries that are leading the rapid ongoing assessments to direct the UN emergency response. And we're also working in coordination with SEDEMA, which is a regional emergency and disaster response agency in terms of ensuring a coherent regional response. We're therefore poised to mount a coordinated humanitarian response to the international development partner community, and we're already engaging international partners in Jamaica and international NGOs, and we hope that this will be finalized in the coming few days. The cost of the disaster still left behind really does not, it's not fully being articulated. As I say, the government is ongoing with its assessment, but the damage is widely apparent and is felt by persons from all walks of life, especially in rural Jamaica, including the southern parishes of Clarendon, Manchester, and St. Elizabeth, and those in vulnerable housing. The UN has observed a very responsive and competent government, let me say, with regard to the national response, which makes our work a bit easier. And Jamaica is obviously very central and core to the regional economy, and the UN is poised to complement the work of the government to accelerate Jamaica's ability to be back on its feet. Thank you.
Let me now give the floor to Simon Springett. I see, did we lose your, oh, hold on. Simon, maybe you can start talking and I think we will see you on the main screen. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm having to speak in my phone and go by video. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today. I also join Dennis RRC in Jamaica in expressing the United Nations sympathies for those affected across Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, and Jamaica. Similar to what Vincent has said, we've been preparing and mobilizing for a considerable number of months for this Atlantic hurricane season. We work very closely with the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, as well as the national disaster authorities in all of the affected countries. For this current Hurricane Beryl, we have deployed coordination and operational staff into the Caribbean Disaster Management Office in Barbados. And we've also deployed rapid needs assessment teams through this regional coordination mechanism into Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as we have a team arriving in the next 10 minutes in Grenada. Prior to the emergency, we had 9 UN agencies in Grenada and 10 in Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. And these agencies and staff are currently being bolstered by surge staff. We're also supporting a logistical hub out of Barbados, which is also putting on, we have 1 ship leaving on Saturday out of St. Vincent, which will be dropping supplies into the outer islands in Grenada and then the outer islands of the Grenadines, and then carrying on into Carriacou and Petite Martinique in northern Grenada. As Dennis said, communications is very, very difficult. It was only yesterday that comms have been established on Carriacou Island. Remembering Carriacou Island in Grenada is a population of 9,000 people, and the entire island is completely affected. So when we talk about 9,000 people affected, we also have to take that into context, that that's literally 100% of the population. There's still no road access. The government has set up an emergency operations center there. Road clearance is underway. We only had our first communication coordination meeting with them last night, with communications being reestablished. We also have really severe impacts on Union Island, Mairu, and Canoon in the Grenadines. One thing I would like to highlight is the national governments have put all of their efforts towards this. There's a huge UN and other development partners response, but I'd also like to recognize the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as Grenada, a massive volunteer effort, communities coming together, really pulling together and trying to alleviate the worst of this suffering. This is a very complicated crisis. I know you probably hear that many times when you speak to people responding, but this is really complicated by the severe logistical and access issues. Directly after the hurricanes, the seas were exceptionally rough, which made it nearly impossible to get there. The air control towers are out, so there's only flyby visibility. But also, even when things get into the airport, it is there's no roads to be able to. There's no roads to be able to access the goods. We do have a large outpouring of international response. A French naval vessel is arriving into Carriacou today. We had support also across the region from Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago. So it's really an international effort. The UN is really proud to be a part of this, and we look forward to giving any additional detail in terms of the material support given and by those agencies involved. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Let me start in the room with Edie.
Thank you both very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. First for Mr. Zulu, can you tell us how many people in Jamaica are affected? I understand that Beryl sort of skirted the south coast. You said rural Jamaica. And you also said that you have $25 million from the UN, I believe. Is that money that you can disperse immediately? And what are the top priorities going to be? And can you paint a picture of us for what southern Jamaica looks like? I'm sure you've probably seen some television and other pictures. Maybe you want to answer that, and then I'll go on to Mr. Springett.
Thank you so much, Edith. As I indicated in my briefing, government is at the moment trying to do a very extensive assessment on the impact of Beryl across the country. But just by looking at, for instance, the figures coming out of the service providers, we note that over 40% of service provision, electricity and internet have been out in the past few days. Also, we see that. And from pictures, as you say, we see that a lot of housing was being destroyed, and hence government has a very effective mechanism of putting into place shelters where a significant number of those affected by destroyed housing moved to. We're happy to note already, and the government has indicated that some of the shelters are now being decommissioned, meaning that people are now going back to their homes. And at the process, there's already support being provided to see how some of these buildings, especially the houses that have been destroyed, can be, and persons there can be supported in repairing their premises. With regard to the money, it's not actually 25 million, it's $2.5 million, and this is made available within the UN SURF facility. The SURF facility is really one that facilitates quick release of funds. And some of the things that we're looking at already with government guidance is really getting some of the money in terms of income support out there, because of course, some of the people who have been affected by lost livelihoods. So we're really looking towards supporting them in terms of some cash transfers. Definitely shelter is one thing we're looking at, as I've alluded to, because some of the buildings and housing has been destroyed. Ensuring the provision of clean drinking water is important at this stage. Make sure that we don't have an outbreak of disease, but also looking at potential for support in terms of and getting access to communication data, and really supporting government to get its systems back in place and as quickly as possible, so that we're really ensuring that. I think we're also looking towards seeing how we can support government. And I think one of the benefits of working with government over a period of time, we have 12 UN agencies resident in Jamaica and 9 working out of Jamaica. And we've, over the past years, been working on supporting resilience building in Jamaica, given the vulnerability of Jamaica and other Eastern Caribbean countries to climate change effects such as Hurricane Beryl. And as you know, this is only the start of hurricane season, and therefore we really need to be working towards putting systems in place to ensure that there's an element of resilience built into this. And a fact that Jamaica has sort of done quite well in managing the after effects of Beryl shows that a lot of work has been done in building local capacity to be able to deal with natural disasters such as Beryl, and is adequately prepared for any subsequent disasters such as the one that we experienced. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. On to the Eastern Caribbean. Mr. Springett, have you gotten any emergency funds from the United Nations? And I'm assuming that the UN is working with this whole regional operation based in Barbados. We've seen these somewhat terrible pictures, particularly of, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, Cariaco in Grenada, and Petit, can't remember the rest of the name. Yeah. What do you think it's going to take to get that whole region back on its feet and people back in homes and livelihoods? Because the devastation there sounds, and in Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, sounds very dramatic.
Thank you very much, Edith. Indeed, it is. Maybe first on the financing, the Secretary General announced the other day the release of Central Emergency Response Funds, and as Dennis alluded to, these are rapid response funds for us to respond to life-saving needs. And that, at the moment, that's about 1.5 million split between St. Vincent and Grenada. But also, I just want to rest assured, all of the agencies are mobilizing both through their donor networks as well as through their core resources. And we've taken a very intentional, no regrets approach. And we go no regrets when we understand that the situation really doesn't allow us to wait for anything. So this means taking some degree of calculated risks financially to be ensured that we're able to support the government and the peoples of both countries adequately. Maybe just to add a little bit of color to the conversation, I listened to the minister that's currently on Carriacou, and some of the partners were saying, do you have space for us to come and set up tents? Do you have any flat areas? And he was pretty direct, and he said the whole island is flat. And then they responded, well, what do you need? And he said, we need anything that would allow a human being to survive. So this is kind of the government's approach and feeling right now. I don't mean to sound over dramatic or stark, but the islands were really dramatically, catastrophically hit. So the desalination plants have been knocked out. All of the cell towers have been knocked out. All of the fiber optic cables have been knocked out. The roads are impassable. We probably have about 95% of the housing stock destroyed. So really and that means, and by default, all of the local businesses, all the income generating activities, and the list goes on. Thank you.
Can you tell us which minister was that who made that very dramatic comment?
I'll have to get back to you. It's the minister responsible for that island. I'm currently sitting in the Ministry of Finance, so I could find out quickly. But well noted, Edith. We'll try to get that back to you.
Okay, and just one other follow-up question on money. You said that you've already seen regional help coming in from Trinidad and Guyana. Do you, longer term, obviously this is going to take a tremendous amount of rebuilding. Can you comment?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, just to reiterate what Dennis said about the dramatic effects of climate change and what we're facing. And also, this was the earliest hurricane on record in the Atlantic and the first ever Cat 5 that's happened in June. We're forecast to get 20 plus over the course of the hurricane season. So this is something that is deeply concerning to all of us if any of these forecasts come out. I just briefly mentioned I was sitting in the Ministry of Finance and also sitting in the Ministry of Economic Development. And, some might say, well, why aren't you out in Carriacou helping? There's other staff doing that. I'm sitting in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, trying to discuss how the development partners can support the government here. So all of the development banks and the partners on how we can also concurrently be looking at the post-disaster reconstruction efforts. This does not mean in no way, shape, or form that the UN is not seized on the first phase response and to helping families and individuals, but we're trying to do this as concurrently as possible so the response is as coherent as possible in terms of national planning processes.
Gabriel?
Thank you. My name is Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English News Channel. Thank you very much for the informative briefing to both of you. A lot of my questions have been answered, but I wanted to follow up, Mr. Springett, on Carriacou. It seems like that's really the quote-unquote epicenter based on what I'm hearing from you. And you mentioned, if I heard you correctly, that there was a ship that arrived either today or yesterday, but I missed what ship that was and where it was from. Can you just give a little more detail on that? And I also didn't understand if Carriacou was completely cut off or how are people getting there now to provide help? Thank you. Then I have a follow-up.
Thank you very much. Carriacou for the first initial periods was completely cut off, both in terms of communication and in terms of both air and sea access. The initial assessment was done as a support through the regional security structure, SEDIMA, and the Prime Minister, and they did a flyover. I'd also like to add that the UN has a number of satellite assets. So we've also done UNOSAT flyovers and have done digital damage assessments based on those photographs. Karaku is now accessible. There is a public ferry that is traveling there every day. There's also a Coast Guard vessel in port, and we also have a French naval vessel arriving today. We had a vessel from Trinidad and Tobago left. So the port infrastructure is able to receive ships. There's policemen and Coast Guard on the island who are offloading these ships and then doing onward distribution. They are organizing a volunteer crew to take a ship over tomorrow to do a lot of the road clearances, and the government's also shipping over a number of vehicles to help in the distribution process. So access is becoming more and more. I know that in these initial phases, it is very difficult to really communicate effectively outside of the disaster zone because it's very, very difficult to get assessed data and figures. But I would again like to commend the government of the Republic of Grenada for what they've been able to achieve in such a difficult environment.
You let me now. Oh, you had a follow. Go. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask also, if you don't mind, this, you mentioned it, but this is one of the earliest hurricanes in the season in many years, if not ever. How much is that impacting how you look ahead now, knowing that this devastating event happened so early in the season? You're not even really got into it yet. That could be for either of you in terms of preparation for the rest of the season, or how it could divert resources from preparation for the rest of the hurricane season. Thank you for either of you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Dennis, go ahead, Dennis.
All right. Okay, I'll go. Yes, indeed. I think the fact that we've been prepping for this for a number of years now is important. And if we just only a few months ago, we just finalized our emergency response plans for both Jamaica and the Bahamas, given the vulnerability. So we have been prepared. We've simulated this, and of course, working very closely with the government and helping government, as I said earlier on, build its own resilience and systems and institutions. In case of such incidents has been very useful. The fact maybe that the fact that we experience things fairly early in the season also, I think it gives us an opportunity really to see and improve on and have some lessons learned coming out of this experience, which can then be applied going forward. So it's both an opportunity for us to strengthen in partnerships and also prepare for any subsequent one. But of course, it sort of caught most countries in a way, given the fact that it's very early in the season. But also for Jamaica, Jamaica hasn't experienced a hurricane in a number of years now. So it was quite surprising in this regard, especially the intensity of the hurricane itself. But looking already, as we say, that looking at some of the impact already, it's heartening to know that I think Jamaica has stood up fairly well, largely because of preparedness, and the UN already has a fairly large amount of agencies already working in country, and of course very ready to get additional staff to support the humanitarian effort. And also already we've reached out and have also been reached out to by the different bilateral partners, all willing and supporting and able to support this current effort, but also in an event that the subsequent efforts that need the UN intervention as well as the bilaterals will be all prepared and ready to go.
Take one
And
question.
just a quick.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
If I could just do a quick follow-on. We also have 4 resident coordinators who are spread across 22 countries in the region representing the Secretary General. And we coordinate very, very closely on preparedness measures. We also have World Food Program has set up a system with the Caribbean Disaster Management Center, a joint logistics system for all partners. And now we've also set up a marketplace. So as an example, if country X has a donation they want to ship somewhere, or agency X, we have a clearinghouse and we can put those goods on different types, sea or air or whatever transport. So we have a robust system, but all robust systems are always tested in times of severe crises. Thank you.
Take one question online, then I will come back to the room. We have Jacqueline Charles from the Miami Herald. Jackie, can you unmute?
Yes, hi, thank you. Just a couple of questions. The UN just was in Antigua not too long ago talking about the development goals, especially for small island states. And I'm just wondering if either of you can address in terms of what this does in terms of countries like Grenada and Saint Vincent being able to meet those development goals, and if you can just elaborate a little bit more in terms of what you see in terms of the climate crisis and the push to get more developed countries to address this issue and what we're seeing with this hurricane. I mean, Prime Minister Mitchell has been very, sort of vocal in saying that, that we shouldn't have to keep having this fight, and that these countries should pay up. So those are my two questions.
Thank you. Maybe I'll start first this time. Dennis and I were both fortunate to attend the fourth SIDS conference in Antigua and Barbuda at the end of May. Clearly, these are the messages that were coming out. A real call and demand for climate justice. And when we say climate justice, it also links to climate-based financing, both adaptation and mitigation. But we also have, as an example, you mentioned Prime Minister Mitchell. The government of Grenada has been trying for a very long time to buffer their stocks and to build some resilience. And now this gets wiped out. These countries all have a very, very high GDP to debt ratio. And reconstruction quite frankly, doesn't get done on grant-based financing. And these governments are not able to take loans at concessional rates. So, I don't want to say small, but events like this, put the sustainable development of these countries back decades. It has such a major impact on their economic development. And I think just to highlight, because you mentioned the SDGs, the global SDG report was just released some time ago, and it shows really limited progress, and there's a lot of work to be done. Dennis?
Yeah, well, just to add slightly on that, I think and the fact that the vulnerability of small island development states, specifically those in the Caribbean, was really reinforced at the SIDS conference, because I think just like Simon has just alluded to, the fact that most of them are deemed to be high-income countries, middle-to-high-income countries that can on their own deal with such disasters in terms of reconstruction is obviously a challenge, because that's not the case. I mean, if you have, like we have, and we're anticipating this year a minimum of 20 hurricanes coming down, and these lead to huge devastation of infrastructure. I mean, the resources of fiscal space that these countries have is really limited in terms of being able to respond and reconstruct. So as some countries, predominantly Barbados, with the Prime Minister of Barbados requesting for a relook at the international financing infrastructure, architecture, to be able to take into consideration the specificities and the vulnerabilities of Caribbean states in their accessing to concessions or grants is very important. But also, when you look at the fact that this happens often, and a lot of these countries are basically indebted because they have to pay for the same bridge many times over, given the fact that you construct one day, it's destroyed the next year or the next month, and they have to reconstruct again. This brings a huge burden on their financial ability to do that. And I think what the SIGS conference really highlighted was the fact that these were issues, and climate change really impacts this part of the world very significantly, and therefore it's a responsibility for all to be able to take care in what we do, given the impact that this has specifically to this region, which might not be very evident in other parts of the world. And the Abbas, the outcome document to this end was clear in terms of responsibility and actions to be taken by all to be able to mitigate the impacts of climate change and its effects in the Caribbean.
Let me come back to the room. I will go to Edie and then Frank.
Just a follow-up question on numbers. Has the government of Grenada and Saint Vincent and the Grenadines and Jamaica given any figures on the total of how many people have been affected by Hurricane Beryl? I mean, we know on Carioca, you've said it's all 9,000 people living there, but are there any broader figures from the governments on the entire country? Thank you.
Well, maybe,
Sure. Go ahead, Dennis.
With one country, maybe just a quick response. As I said, I think just as we speak at the moment, government has an extensive process of assessing the impact of Beryl across the country. Very difficult at this stage to be able to ascertain exactly how many were affected. But as I said earlier on, looking at the fact that we had significant levels of people moving on to shelters because of destroyed housing, but also the fact that a lot of services were cut, and all this has to be taken into account. So I'm afraid at the moment, very difficult to put a number to the impact in the case of Jamaica.
Frank?
What about Saint
there we go.
Vincent and the Grenadines and Grenada?
Sure, Edie, I can take that. So in Saint Vincent, we have in the Grenadines, we have three major islands affected: Union Island, Canwan, and Maru, and the total population of those is about 15,500. We also do have impacts on the southern, for lack of a better word, mainland, so on Saint Vincent itself. And then in Grenada, the two main islands, which we've mentioned, Carriacou and Petite Martinique, that is about more or less 11,000 people. But we also have significant damages on the northern mainland of Grenada, particularly in St. Patrick's and St. John Parish. And those two parishes, the population is roughly 10,000, but the impacts there are not nearly the same as on the islands. So the percentages are down. For the data and statistics, we currently have, at least in Grenada, we have the Central Statistics Office doing a preliminary household survey on Carawan. And the government is doing a holistic needs assessment for the northern areas of Grenada, which will be ready a week from today.
Frank, go ahead.
This is something both of you can ask. Frank Uciardo from TRT World, thank you for having this press conference. Two things. One, in both your experiences on an emotional level when this hit, what was your initial reaction? And number two, in terms of tourism, which is the lifeblood of many of these island nations, what are you forecasting as far as the impact?
Who wants to take it first? Mr. Zulu, go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right, I'll go ahead. Yes, indeed. I think for Jamaica, the fact that we've not really had a hurricane in a while now, obviously having one and fairly early in the season this year really has a lot of effect on the emotional parts of individuals and the communities in the country. But I think what we see again is this spirit of resilience amongst the population of Jamaica in being able to overcome such tragedy. But I think this is the spirit of unity and the spirit of being able to help each other out in such needs has also helped because you see that the spirit of camaraderie between the different neighbors helping each other out, for instance, to reconstruct housing, helping out in short-term provision of foodstuffs and things like that is what has really helped going forward. So the emotional part has been quite serious, but obviously they're coping quite well in that regard, given the whole framework of resilience in Jamaicans. But in terms of tourism, obviously was hit, especially with the closing of the airports. Jamaica's quickly moved towards opening up the airports. I think effective this morning, all the airports are running. Predominantly, the major one in Montego Bay, which accounts for a significant number of tourist arrivals, is up and running. From preliminary assessments, very little harm came to the infrastructure in terms of tourist hotels and resorts. So that is really positive. The airlines are coming in, and in the short term, really, I think, although we're yet to determine, obviously, during the period that the hurricane hit, there'd been a shutdown. The airports, so tourist arrivals had fallen, but Jamaica is up and running, if I may say that, and the government is moving seriously to ensure that, especially the access to the resorts, the roads, and getting people back to work in these areas is done as soon as possible. Thank you. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much. I think you can appreciate the nature of weather systems, and particularly hurricanes, is that they develop over a course of days and sometimes weeks. And this can have quite an emotional toll on people. Really not sure what to expect, when to expect it. Some of these islands, I believe, if I'm correct, Karakou hasn't been hit by a major storm since, I think, 1955. I stand to be corrected. So you also, we need to always continue to work diligently to really push the importance of having the evacuation centers and also the personal preparedness. But it is these are clearly hugely traumatic events, and even when these events only hit a portion of a nation, it really affects deeply to the soul of the rest of the population. Because it is difficult to get support up. It's difficult to help, and even non-affected families, really feel kind of helpless and deeply affected. For tourism, clearly, this is going to be a major impact, particularly on those smaller islands in the Grenadines and in the north of Grenada. Fortunately, major infrastructure such as airports and ports weren't hugely damaged, and hopefully tourists won't give up on visiting these lovely islands.
Thank you so much. Do you have another question?
No, I just wanted to remind Mr. Springett if he could find the name of that minister for us. Thank you.
We'll follow up. We'll follow up and we'll get you an answer, Edie. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today. And thank you so much for all of you for joining us in person and online. So the work continues. As we had said, there's no noon briefing today, so that completes our programming for today. We will be back on Monday, but as you know, we're always available on the phone, by email. So if there are any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much again, and work continues, lots of work. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.